Welcome back to the Brothers War EDH. We're back again with the podcast, back with the boys. Chris and Blake, what's going on, guys?
What's going on, guys? It's back again. It's good to see y'all.
God, I work with amateurs.
Here for another beautiful day.
Beautiful
At
day.
the,
We're here to talk about Magic, not look at the day.
Okay.
It's true. Today is going to be a really interesting episode. Another one of those topics that I feel like that a lot of people talk about, but it doesn't really get talked about enough. But before we get into that, I just want to ask y'all to please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, help us get ourselves out there. This podcast will also be on Spotify, and drop a like on here, and drop a 5-star rating on the podcast if you like it. Remember, watch or listen to it in like 1.5 speed. It makes it a lot more concise for you.
Digestible.
Yeah. Digestible is definitely the better way to say it. With that, let's get into the topic. Today we are talking about the power level scale. For this episode, we're actually going to use the power level scale that we were using in our gameplay episodes before. It's a 10 tier power level scale, which more times than not, people probably only use maybe like 6 through 8 when they're like, okay, well, yeah, my deck is this, because otherwise you're either playing CDH or you're probably playing just Battle Cruiser, and everything under that kind of falls into those. So but we're gonna get into this. First of all, what do y'all think of the power level scale?
It's mostly just a trap as far as I'm concerned.
Trap.
There's a prevailing meme amongst basically every EDH channel that, oh, my deck is a 7. Oh, my deck is a 7. And what does that exactly mean? I think nobody knows what that truly means.
Yeah.
And everyone just wants to think that their deck is, it's like, oh, my deck's not average, my deck's above. So they like, of course, it can't be a 5. I built it. It's got to be something higher than that. So I think everybody, like, basically as a whole, unless you're specifically trying to like pub stomp or try to like, get somebody by playing, coy with what your deck is truly doing, I think almost everybody overvalues the power level of their deck 9 times out of 10, especially in my experience with like people who are just new to the format. When you run into pods that are specifically online where they have like a range, so I'm looking to play 6 to 8, that is a very scary place because the power levels of 6 to 8s are like wildly different if you really like think about it. But everybody thinks of those as like close enough, whereas I think that's not true at all. 6 is like where you're like just starting to like optimize your list, and 8 is just below what you would consider CEDH. I think those two are not as close in power level as it might seem at first glance.
So Blake just mentioned 6 through 8. I'm just gonna read these off for y'all. And it's funny because we used to have these on the screen on our gameplay episodes all the time. 6 is, the title is just called Decks with a Plan. Decks have a definite strategy in mind, or multiple, that synergize well to enable a solid game plan. Spell choices are more focused, but with mixed levels of efficiency. Lands entering untapped are prioritized. Battlecruiser decks are uncommon. Most decks contain at least one hard win con, usually a combo. Decks often have a modest budget. Then you move into 7, playing with power. Decks are largely refined down to just the best cards for their strategy. Perfect, nearly perfect land bases, multiple cheap tutors, highly efficient ramp draw, etc. Most decks become less generalist as they focus more heavily on their primary strategy. Expect to see lots of powerful staples. Higher budget decks are fairly common. And the 8 is, they called it living on the edge. Decks have a specific, consistent game plan, often following defined lines of play. Every card enables, supports, or protects the deck's primary strategy. Lots of low-cost ramp and tight curves means casting multiple spells a turn can be expected as early as turn 1. Many decks, but not all, are high budget to budget lists. Y'all are talking about the turn counts. That's actually another part of the power level skill. I just want to read this off really quick. So, starting from the top, power level 10 and 9. It says turn count 0 to 4, with 0, 1, and it shows half of 2, which I guess it's I guess half the time on turn 2 would be a power level 10, and then the other half of 2, turn 3 and turn 4 would be power level 9. Going down to power level 8 is turn 5, 6, and then half of 7. 7 would be half of 7, 8, and 9 turn.
Before you continue, Ryan, one thing I want to specifically get at here is, and for people that have never played CEDH, just because a win is presented does not mean somebody wins. What this is specifically referring to is how quickly you can present a win. It does not mean that's how fast the games are always going to go. Right. I'll be honest, I actually find that my level 8 games go a lot faster than some of the CEDH games, because all of the CEDH games are specifically built around understanding that someone is going to present a win somewhere between 0 to 4, and they're able to stop the wins. Whereas a lot of my 8 games, most people aren't able to interact because they haven't properly assessed their deck, and you just present a win on turn 5, 6, and the game's fucking over. So I actually think it's funny that, looking at my experience from mostly playing high in CEDH, that I actually think my high games go a lot faster than some of the CEDH games I've been in.
See, the power level 6 and 5, you're looking at turns 10 to 14. But what's interesting about all of these is that they are packed into tiers. Like power level 9 and 10 are in the competitive tier. 7 and 8 are in the optimized tier. 5 and 6 power level are in the tune tier, and then everything kind of like under that is under
battle cruiser.
Yeah, pretty much battle cruiser.
So my general thoughts on power level charts is that they are all a joke, and this is the reason why. So I like the intention behind trying to figure out a power level, right? Everybody wants to try to be on the same page. It makes sense. You want to try to get the best game experience, like we talked about in the first episode. Nobody wants to pub stomp anybody. It feels bad. So to try to make sure everybody's on the same page, they create a power level chart. The problem is it's subjective. Everybody wants to play, like what Blake mentioned before. Everybody's 7 is different. Nobody can come to a consensus on a chart that is perfect. Even the chart that we used, we stopped with it because even though we understood within our group what it meant, people didn't agree, or they didn't really look at the descriptions that we gave, and they said, "Oh, this looks a little stronger than what you say here, or what you said here," and stuff like that. And then the thing is, when you get into trying to get on the same page past the power level chart, you kind of get into trying to give too much information out. And what I mean by that is, in order for you to get on the same page, you have to be like, oh, this is what I think a 1 is. This is what I think a 10 is. And you have to go through everything in between, and then even then you probably won't be able to find something that everybody's on around the similar power level. So it's almost like it doesn't even matter anymore. It's like it's cringy now to have. I think Blake mentioned this in the last episode. It's cringy to have a power level chart now, because like it doesn't really get anywhere. So yeah, that's my general thoughts on power level charts.
I don't disagree with you. I will say I think there is a benefit to having something that the wider community does agree on, which I think for the most part our chart is pretty close to what I see most other EDH channels talk about. My problem is how people then take and interpret that chart, and what they think a 6 is, what they think an 8 is, what they think a 10 is, because
Yep.
but unless you're specifically playing in a CDH pod, like 9 and 10s are exclusively in CDH to fringe CDH. I don't like, if you call your deck a 10 and you're not playing in a CDH pod, you're either specifically there to stomp and just be a bad play partner, or you have no idea what you're talking about. And then I think basically most people misrepresent themselves as sevens, because if you went to EDH Rec and basically looked at every single deck that was on there, you would basically find the power level. If you were to take that list and really objectively look at every single deck, most of them would be 4, 5, 6.
I agree with
For the most, but it would definitely be the bell curve. You would have,
Yep.
ones, twos, threes, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it would be that bell curve sort of shape.
Beautiful
And
bell.
wow, thank you. I'm great with my hands. So what? For lack of a better term, I think for especially because before we start breaking things down, I think almost always you should basically just assume you're a 6 until you should assume you're a 5 until you actually start delving into the actual contents of your deck, how much card draw you're running, how much interaction you're doing. There's a lot of variables that then places you among the curve, and nobody has time to do that sort of like calculation for everybody's deck.
Right.
So that's where the power chart falls apart, is because you have to very quickly map out where you think you are, and then now you're trying to map yourself against 3 other players. You may not know their decks, you don't know their deck lists. Everything is subjective because you have to basically take their word that they have also properly assessed themselves. So I think it's almost impossible to go up to 3 randoms and have everybody give you a proper power level. So I think that is inherently the problem with the power chart. I do think it's a novel idea, and it's something that we can probably as a game refine and like continue to encourage people. Again, back to one of the first things we ever talked about on the podcast is self-reflection. Actually take a really strong look at your deck and truly grade yourself what you actually it is not it, what I don't want people to think is like, oh, my deck is a 5, so my deck is like, think of that as a negative. It's not necessarily a negative. People are looking for different experiences with EDH, and that's okay. If you want to play somewhere between the 1 to 4 power, that's not necessarily a negative. It's something that just needs to be understood that it's mostly just going to affect play.
Right.
And how long the game goes, what cards are being played, what kind of budget you're on. There shouldn't be a stigma on giving yourself a lower score.
Exactly.
Because it has nothing to do with like your skill as a pilot or your skill as a deck builder. It's just the choices you make. If you like pet cards that aren't necessarily optimal, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You would just need to technically lower your grade, because if you look at yourself versus an 8, they are not running any of the, funny troll cards or pet cards. They are more than likely running highly synergistic and the most cost-efficient cards, because they are the top end of what you would consider high power, and it's going to be a lot different than a 5. Can a 5 win? Sure, of course. But you're going to theoretically hurt the overall play experience of not only yourself, but potentially that level 8 player, because they're going to expect something from you that you're just not able to produce.
Yeah. I like what you brought up about, I wanted to expand a little bit about what you said about giving yourself a lower power level grade. Again, he talked about play experience. There's nothing wrong with, like when you go into an 8 power level game, you're expecting high power play, tight plays, powerful cards, and your deck might have that. However, it might not have a lot of the other things that's going to make it consistent and efficient. And you have to know how efficient and consistent your deck is. Be honest with your deck. Be honest with yourself. Properly grade your deck, and it's okay to have a 4 power level deck. That's the experience that you want to have. Like, again, you want to have those pet card games. You're more than welcome to have those games. There's nobody stopping you from doing it. Just understand that you have to understand how efficient your deck is, and try to play within that range of power level as well. And then again, we're going to talk about this later, but pre-game conversations is extremely important for people that you don't know, because everybody wants to expect something, and you want to make sure that your deck fits those expectations.
The fact that you go in a spell table and find 6 through 8, 8 being arguably probably like fringe CDH, like lower end CDH, and then 6 is like, oh yeah, lands entering untapped are prioritized. Battle cruiser decks are uncommon. Like, I think the problem with the power level scale is that there's just too much ambiguity. It's hard to really define your deck using like a number. It doesn't really help just going, like what Blake was saying, going into a game with like a bunch of randoms and being like, yeah, my deck's a 7, because for one, their definition of a 7 could be different. It could be different than yours, and also like what Blake said, you're probably overshooting your deck, or you might be undershooting your deck, and it gets even worse when people undershoot for the sake of just pub stopping. So I wanted to ask y'all, because y'all were throwing out the power level numbers. I have the chart right here. And to me, I was going to ask y'all, do y'all think that it would be better to do away with the numbers and just call it like battle cruiser, mid, high, and like CDH? Because
I think you're gonna run into the same problem, I think, because people are gonna that we do now, is that everyone is just gonna assume that they're a 7, so they're gonna call themselves high. And again, I think the disparity between what you would consider an 8 deck and a 6 deck, while they're still in the high tier, both of them are vastly different, to the point where I think, like me myself, being like, wanting things to be as equal as possible, so we get that kind of game experience that I'm looking for, with in terms of competition and interaction and that sort of thing. I think it's we run into this, and Chris can attest to this as well. We run into this all the time on Spell Table, where we're playing in a pot of 4, and it feels like it's basically a 1v1 commander, because the other 2 people are just not playing to our expected level that we specifically requested, and it hurts the overall experience. I might as well have not played the game, in my personal opinion, because it's not the experience that I'm looking for, because they can't necessarily, they've overvalued their deck, and it ruins my game experience as well a little, to a certain degree. I wouldn't say it completely ruins it, but there is, I'm hoping for more out of that game than I'm getting. So I think, to answer your question, Ryan, I think you're just going to fall into the same pitfall. And I think that's where, and this can be potentially a segue, where I think the pregame conversation is really like what I hopefully would set expectations. It's just my internal problem with that, and we can get into this in a minute, is that I think that bogs down the social experience, especially if you're trying to play with no people, because it's like, oh, here's what I want of this game, and oh, here's what I want out of this game. And it's like, well, if those things aren't the same thing, what are you supposed to do? Do you just get up and walk away from the table? Do you like find some sort of compromise by you playing a different deck or them playing a different deck? It just starts to become not what I want, and it's almost where, like, it would be better if we could go into like almost like an ELO system, where, like, the higher decks would theoretically generate a better score. You would then queue into them, that kind of thing. Obviously, we can't have that; that's impossible. But I think it's a hard subject to tackle, and I don't think there's a good answer at this current juncture for what to do.
I personally feel like the best way to describe your power level is to, in the pregame conversation, talk about around which turns your deck expects to present either wins or make some pretty impactful plays to where the game starts to end.
Take control of the board, basically.
Right. So if I say I expect my deck to be able to do what it's supposed to be doing around turn 6 to 8, right? That puts an expectation that sets an expectation that's like, oh, this is probably a little bit higher power, not quite CEDH, but if they're trying to close games around 6 to 8, or actually try to present stuff with no interaction, and present wins with no interaction around 6 to 8, that says a lot about a deck. If someone comes up to me and says, I'm trying to win around roughly 10 to 12, I would consider that more of a mid to low power or battle cruiser kind of game. You know what I mean? You're trying to look for the long game and stuff like that. If someone comes to me and says, I'm trying to win between turns 1 and 4, that to me says, oh, that this is kind of creeping up, and then actually very highly creeping up into the CEDH range.
I would call that CEDH 1 to 4.
100%. Yeah. When you're presenting wins on turns 1 through 4, that's CDH. Yep. So I think that takes away all of those numbers. That takes away all of those it kind of does what you said and puts those categories into like those categories that kind of have these blurred lines into like these kind of like ranges of what turns your deck is willing to or wanting to kind of close the game.
Now, see, it's funny you say that because I've got an exact example that doesn't match with that idea. So let's take my Muldrotha deck, for example. I'm not presenting a win for a long time, but I will sit at the highest power tables because every single card that I am playing is some sort of interaction, and I can basically slow every single deck down to my level. So I feel comfortable playing in those sort of ranges. So while I do like your statement, and I think for the most part that works for most decks, I think that's not necessarily true and is not a catch-all.
Yeah,
sure. Again, like I said,
there's always going to be those like
absolutely. But that's the thing I'm trying to get across is that I don't think there's one good answer for this question. I think to Ryan's point, what he specifically said is it's all about the player. They have to understand their deck and they have to care about everybody else's play experience plus their own to properly grade and understand where they think their deck lands, and then be able to and then one of the biggest things in our format is have the social skills to be able to properly communicate that to the pod, because exactly. that is something that is also extremely difficult where, one person or another is, introverted, doesn't like talking. You're playing with a bunch of random people. They just want to play the game. They're not here to talk to you and make friends and that sort of thing. So they're just going to throw you a number and they're going to stop talking because they're either uncomfortable with talking. They don't, that sort of thing. So there's like a whole other social aspect to this problem as well. Yeah. So it's very hard, but yeah, just an example of where necessarily that rule doesn't work for just specifically one of my decks, where I would consider it right in that 8 range, where basically I'm playing all the ramp, all the potential win cons, but technically my deck can't present a win until I draw one very specific card that costs me 10 mana. But because of the way I've constructed my deck and the cards that are in it, I can sit at those tables and still be able to produce wins. Like I said, I don't think there's an answer to this question. I don't think you can look at you can't look at one factor and truly be able to decide what decks are supposed to play with each other. Because if there was, someone would have already found it by now, and we'd already be talking about it. We wouldn't be having this fucking podcast.
Right. Hey, guys, look at me. This is why you play CDH. There's none of that trash.
The true format.
None of that pre-game conversation. You don't have to deal with the social aspect. You play your cards. You win or lose between turns 1, sometimes up to turn 10. Hey, you just never know. If you want to play a slower game,
forever.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you want to play a longer game, play a stacks deck. So if you want to get away from the pre-game conversations, which a lot of people they actually do want to avoid that power level scale. That is actually a thing. Try dipping your toes in a little bit of CDH and see if you like it. This goes back to what I said earlier when I talked about power level charts. It's too much information. Nobody's going to sit there and listen to 5 minutes of a spiel of, this is what a 10 is. This is going to go between, 9 and 10 are categorized in the competitive tier. It's going to go to turns 0 to 4. It's, way too much information. The thing that people want to hear in a pregame conversation is how fast can this deck win or present a win? And how efficient and consistent is this deck? Your spiel shouldn't have to be, describing a whole power level chart, because 1, they might not even know the power level chart. 2, they may not even agree with the power level chart, and that's a whole nother thing. And so it's not getting anywhere to talk about power level charts. And if there was an answer, then we'd already have it. Magic, especially Commander's been around for 10 plus years. It's a never ending.
Well, I do agree with that. I would say that Commander hasn't really exploded until the last 3, to be fair. So I think it's almost like a completely new format. Like if you look at it from what it was at 10 years when it first was built to what it is now. Because again, a lot of people have migrated from, because they don't like the decisions with standard, don't like what's happening in modern, don't like what and Wizard of the Coast is a straight supporting commander basically nonstop. All of the sets have fucking a million commanders in them. So I think a lot of people are, there are still a lot of people that are migrating to our format or half play our format and that sort of thing. So I think there's still like a lot of new space that it's still being like created here. But ultimately, yes, if there was a way to very easily define and be able to communicate that to everybody, it would have already been found and done. So that's where I think it mostly lies on the pilots and them being able to have the conversation. But that's again where it's not a fun aspect of the game. Like when you sit down to play a board game, what's the most boring part is when fucking somebody has to read the rules to you for 30 minutes about how to play the board game. And that's effectively what your pregame conversation is. It's like, oh, I'm Blake and this is my Muldrotha deck, and I'm just trying to play permanents to blow up all your stuff because I hate permanents. It's everybody's got to go through their entire deck and explain exactly what it's doing, how it's winning, that sort of thing. It's just not a particularly fun conversation.
It's not, but I feel like
I don't know if there's really ever any answer to make this any better, but
the best way I can explain it is again, like we talked about in the first podcast, find a play group, get their number, shoot them a Discord invite and be like, hey, we're going to build a community to where these are like-minded people who have the same expectations, and that's another way you can avoid those pregame conversations on Spell Table. I do think that if you are willing to play Spell Table, you also have to be willing to have those conversations, because that's kind of the game you're stepping in. So I mean, there's a back and forth battle between that, but again, if you do truly not want to have those conversations every day, which nobody does, find and build a community of people. Come to the Brothers War. Shoot, we have a Discord and we can play with y'all as well. So
the real answer is just to make friends, is what you're saying.
Make friends or play
CEDH.
or play CEDH.
Make friends or play
CEDH. They're not going to like that answer. Probably not.
No one's going to like that answer. But if you want to get away from the pregame conversation, you just have to treat the format as everybody wants to win. I don't care about what your play experience is. I'm just going to try to win. That's how. That's the best way to avoid that conversation, because nobody cares about feel bads. Everybody understands what they're sitting down for. If they don't draw any lands and they don't do anything and they die, they signed up for that experience, and you won't hear them complain about it, because that's how it goes.
The beauty of Spell Table, though, is that you're literally sitting on your camera instead of at a table of limited amount of people. So you can, if you have this pregame conversation and you're like, oh, actually, this deck is a little bit too powerful or not as powerful, I'm going to go find a different game. Nobody's going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're leaving. You know what I mean? So like, or they'll maybe even try to accommodate and be like, oh, I have this other deck that I can use. That's kind of sitting around that power level. But yeah, again, like then you could just queue up for another game. That's the beauty of Spell Table. You don't have to, look amongst the limited amount of people at your LGS. And the beauty of LGS is that you get to cultivate relationships, that the decks. And if you like the decks, you can continue playing with them. If you don't, you can play CD. I'm just kidding.
It's funny. I actually think that where a lot, and just being a Magic content troll, just constantly browsing Reddit, the biggest complaint about like game experience and not getting what they want comes from LGS players. And the reason that is because LGS only has like, so, unless you're at a huge LGS like fucking Card Kingdom or, in very specific places where they have a huge community, my guess is you probably only have like a 50 people that go to that LGS, maybe. And however, how many of them play, Commander? Maybe not all of them. So maybe that's even a lower pool. So you only have a certain select people to play with. And if they don't agree with your mentality, you are out of luck. You have nobody else to play with. So I think that's where it's a big encouragement to buy a webcam, play Spell Table, even like do Magic on, like it's a real Magic online, not Arena, because you can play Commander on there, and you can actually, there are certain ways that you can basically increase the amount of people you're allowed to play with so you can actually find and curate that community, or at least be able to leave if you don't like what you hear in that first thing. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, to Chris or to Ryan's point, make more friends, you people.
You people.
You people.
Talking is not hard. Just talk.
Yeah, but what if they don't like me, Chris? What do I do?
Either become a better person or
just be a better person.
Or
Oh, that's hard for me to do. I'm a pretty shitty person.
We're kind of like throwing out like a lot of different things, and besides like the joking, being like just play CDH, stuff like that. Let's say that someone wanted to go down the route of still trying to go into like a spell table game, or they're trying to find the right room to play within a specific type of like power level. So the message that we're really trying to tell them is just know your deck. You don't really have to like necessarily say what your deck does, but just be like, yeah, my deck is aiming to try to present a win around this.
You could preface with that saying, hey, I just built this deck. I don't really know too much about it. I think it's around this range. I'm willing to play at this range. And that sets expectations. You know what I mean? That they're not, if the people that you're playing against get like destroyed by that deck, let's say there was a combo in there and you didn't realize it, and one of your opponents pointed it out, I highly doubt there's going to be as much salt that's going to be induced there than if you were to just be like, oh, I'm going to play this combo and win the game. You know what I mean? So I just think that you just have to be honest and transparent with people in your pregame conversations. That's gonna stop the most salt.
So 2 points to what Chris just said, I think, and one thing that I think will help game experience for most people is, number one, is being okay at playing at a certain level. Your deck may not be exactly 8, but if you're 7 and you're okay at playing at that level, for the most part, that will be an okay game experience. Because if everybody else is in that area, you guys will be mostly balanced, and the multiplayer aspect of the game can kind of even that out for you. Now, there is also the conversation of maybe some of those people would want you to be closer to their level for like the game experience, like I said earlier. That's less important, I will say, because at least, in myself, I can at least I can play the game if somebody's a little lower than me and I'm still okay in that scenario. It may not be exactly what I was looking for, but ultimately that game was still worth playing. And the other thing I think that will really help is not only knowing your deck, but knowing the questions to ask your opponents. Because and pregame conversation is not just, I'm going to sit on my soapbox, I'm going to talk about my deck, and then I'm not answering any questions. Don't you fucking talk to me. I'm done talking. No, you can talk to everybody. Hey, Chris, you didn't mention if you have combos. Do you have any combos in the deck? Oh, Chris, you never talked about when you can present a win. Can you tell me about that in your deck? Yeah. Would you be willing to tell me your strategy? You can ask questions to discern people's decks if they don't want to discuss. And if they're not willing to answer you, that's a pod that I'm not interested in playing in personally. If they're not trying, if we're not having a conversation. Now, CDH table, completely different. I'm not, I'm probably know all the decks at the table to begin with because I expect a metagame, but I'm not going to expect those people to give me all the answers, because part of being competitive at that point is me figuring it out. And there is some there is some merit in not knowing exactly what's going on if you've never been in a CDH table before. So that maybe is a slightly different experience. But I would say if you're specifically playing casual EDH, trying to cultivate an experience for yourself, ask questions. That will 9 times out of 10 help you decide whether you want to play in the pod or not.
To add on that, prioritize game experience and not the power level of your deck, like what Blake was basically what Blake was talking about. But you're going to have a much better experience if you were like, oh, this is a little bit less powerful than I expected, and then you go into a game with less powerful decks that are on your level. By the end of that game, you're going to have so much better of an experience than if you were to join that game that has 8 power level decks and you're sitting at a 5.
Yep.
So it's okay to play at a lower power deck, a lower power level pod. because you're going to get much more of an better experience out of it.
Ultimately, it will be a funner game because you get to actually play your deck. What everybody complains about and where all the saltiness comes from in EDH is not being able to do the thing that you've built your deck to do. So if your deck is a lower power level and you play in a higher power level pod, more than likely you're not going to get to do the thing because you're not set up to do the thing in that sort of play experience. So what you would want to do is you lower your power level, you go to a different group, and then you should be able to cultivate that play experience. And that's ultimately what what most people are looking for when it comes to EDH. So I would say summarizing all of our points is don't get locked into this mentality of 1 to 10. Don't get, don't just go cookie cutter. Don't just go into a game and say, hey, my deck is a 6 and stop talking. There needs to be more conversation, more understanding of your own deck, asking questions of everybody else, and really understanding what play experience you're getting into. That will infinitely increase the amount of fun you're having playing EDH. And not only will it help your experience, but it should theoretically help the entire table. That way, everybody had a great game. Everybody is enjoying everyone's company. You then can make friends and you can continue to cultivate that experience moving forward.
So yeah, great summary from Blake. We're going to segue into our hot take section. What kind of hot takes do y'all have for us today?
Stop playing 3 mana rocks.
That is not a hot take. I've honestly, for the most part, the community is on top of that. Where basically, until they start coming out with 3 mana rocks that are truly like good,
they're starting to push them,
which is good. I want them to.
I agree.
I am all about like playing a 3 mana rock. Like a Crowded Crypt is one like I think is actually like specifically good in certain strategies.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think they're
Crowded Crypt.
I think they're starting to get there. It's just no, we're definitely not there yet.
Did I show you the one that I liked from the? There's 2 of them. One from Doctor Who, and then one from the set before. Did I talk to you about these, or I talked to Ryan about them?
I'm not sure. I know what you're talking about.
So one of them is actually I did a short on. So the first one.
One of them, the signpost.
Yes, one of them is the signpost.
I don't
what do you
like
think about that one?
Because it's just when it enters the battlefield, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so
maybe in a Blink deck that gets more interesting.
The second one is they both came. There are 2 parts from Doctor Who. They're called. One of them is called
the Sonic Screwdriver.
Yes.
Aren't those 3 mana?
Yep.
I think Screwdriver's getting pretty close.
Yeah. So tap to add a mana of any color, 3 mana. Pay 1 and tap to untap another target artifact. Pay 2 and tap scry 1. Pay 3 and tap target creature can't be blocked. There's another one though that I actually.
So I think specifically
Screwdriver
in artifact decks that want to like untap Mana Vault and stuff like that. I actually think that card's pretty good.
And there's also Laser Screwdriver, which is 3 mana for a tap for a color. Pay 1 tap to tap target artifact. Pay 2 and tap to surveil 1, and then pay 3 and tap to goad target creature. I think these are getting pretty close. I mean, they're
I think you're at the point where those 2 in specific decks are actually good and like worth playing over like a Signet or something like that. Mm-hmm. Specifically Signets, because Signets are like I think my least favorite 2-drop mana rock nowadays, because I don't like that Signets require you to put a mana in.
Yeah.
So I think like I could definitely see an argument for like a goad deck or an artifact deck that's looking to untap, or maybe even like the fucking Azorius Witch Queen Tapper, but that just taps an artifact, not a creature, so that's not. But anyway, if you want those effects, I think we're starting to get to the point where. Yeah. Those are flexible and modal enough that they're actually good 3 mana rocks, and that might be what they need to do. Is that 3 mana rocks just need to do some number of things? They can't just do one thing. And the more flexibility and more modal they get, the better the 3 mana rock is.
Mm-hmm. The difference between you being able to do Ancient Tomb, Mana Crypt, or Soul Ring into one of those 2 mana rocks from a 3 mana rock is actually pretty
huge. Yeah, especially as your power level goes up. That easily can be the difference between presenting a win on turn 2 or presenting a win on turn 3.
Exactly.
And in CDH, that matters a fuckload. So,
and those extra minuscule abilities aren't going to matter at that point. So,
absolutely, which is why I still think it's going to be very important. I think at the higher tables, you would never run it.
You still wouldn't be able
no chance you run a 3 mana rock unless, like I said, it's literally got to fucking like do something something insane, absolutely insane.
There is a 3-mana rock that I actually, like you said, Crowded Crypt, Blake. In Lysel, I'm running a 3-mana rock. It's called Gatewatch Beacon, and you know what it is.
Oh, sure.
Enters with 3 loyalty counters and taps for a white. Doesn't enter tapped. Whenever a Planeswalker ETBs, you can remove a loyalty counter from it onto a Planeswalker, which would get 2 loyalties with Lysel out, which is insane in this deck. I've played. I think I've been able to.
Well, and that's what I'm getting at, is that 3-mana rock like fundamentally breaks Magic for Planeswalkers, especially with Lae'zel's ability stapled on top of it.
Right.
So like that's where 3-mana rocks have to be to really be like fucking playable. Is they have to like fundamentally like they have to have a static ability or like something that like really like affects the game. Like if a 3-mana rock had Teferi, the Time Raver ability, like you can only play spells at sorcery speed. Like that shit's like super good and playable. You could do exactly what like how the Planeswalker works. So you could have a fucking 3-mana rock that has Liliana's ability that when a creature dies, you draw a card. You could maybe say it like it only triggers once per turn or something like that if you really want to like balance it.
It's actually a pretty good idea.
That's where you need to go with 3-mana rocks. That's where they become good.
They have a passive ability like that.
Yes.
We want to know what y'all think. You know, do y'all run 3-mana rocks? Do y'all think that they're useless? What do y'all look for in y'all's 3-mana rocks? Are there some that we haven't talked about here? Let us know in the comments. And with that being said, you know, we're just going to end this episode. Do y'all have anything else that y'all want to say regarding the power level chart or, you know, the hot take?
No, not necessarily. I think we covered everything.
3-mana rocks may eventually get there, but we are not to the point where I would really ever consider them except out of very niche scenarios.
Y'all, thank y'all so much for watching today's episode. As always, you know, like, share, subscribe, all those things. We want to thank our patrons once again: Brian Chambers, Jay Giggs, Drew Garth. Y'all are amazing. Y'all, you know, I just want to throw out some things about what's been going on with the channels. We just hit over 300 followers on TikTok, almost 3,000 total likes. We're almost at 830 subs. Hopefully, you know, it might be a stretch, but some of the goals that I'm hoping for the channel is if we can hit 1,000 subs by the end of the year, that'd be great. So, you know, please subscribe to the channel if you like this. But yeah, it's been a fun ride so far. Be on the lookout. We are going to be getting our Ixalan gameplay in pretty soon. We're really excited to showcase some of the legendaries that have been coming from the set, and maybe even some other cards that come from the set might be in those decks. We're probably going to be having that gameplay out within probably the next few weeks. So we are the Brothers War. We will see y'all later.